This program is brought to you by the James S. Holloway Foundation, supporting business development through a combination of international outreach and community initiatives, and the Ted and Ann Warner
James and
Foundation,
Ann
innovating community
Alfred
foundation. And listeners that are like you. You're welcome. Welcome to Homestead Moments with Ben Balmer, where the sky is blue, the doors are unlocked, and the house soup is always minestrone. There was a pervading melancholy to the street lamps on Leland Street that night, each glowing orb standing alone in the night and casting no shadow in the dark. And although no rain had fallen that night, rivulets of water streamed through the cracks in the pavement. The brief circles of light came and passed me by as I walked down Leland Street that night, and in that moment both beautiful and terrible, the cracks seemed to widen beneath me, and the depth and breadth of the night threatened to stifle me. For the stars that night and their divine beams left no light on the earth, and we were left with the brittle stature of the street lamps, clinging to the earth for only a brief moment in all of history. And so I found my footsteps slowing as the night overcame me, and I stopped to sit down on a curb, staring at the orbs of light in the night. Of course, when you're raised Episcopalian, the night seemed brighter and the light seemed darker, until it all dissolves into one shade of gray. Today on Homestead Memories, we're going to be talking about sadness and the people who didn't know they were living with it. There were no street lamps on Lake Clapton that night, but the moon provided all the light that was needed. The lake was still as still could be, same as the night I walked down Leland Avenue, and the only sound you could hear was the sound you always heard on Lake Clapton, a Winnebago starting over and over again into the night. Jay Brandt was out on the lake that night, fishing. He was a good man. He'd always thought himself to be, and he was. But as he pulled up his fishing rod that night, he fished the last fish in Lake Clapton. Taking the fillet to a table, he sat eating it in bittersweet silence. Sadness is an odd creature, slipping in through the cracks and the points where eyes meet and convey all that needs to be conveyed. It can seem all too personal at times, but I've always seen it as postured contextually on things like Art Garfunkel or the casserole you eat alone in your house on a Tuesday afternoon. One of the saddest moments in my life was eating a casserole in my house on a Tuesday afternoon, not alone, but with Art Garfunkel. He didn't even like casserole. Jay Brandt used to live on Leland Avenue. He'd lived a long life, 67 years long, and 35 of those years without a sense of smell or taste. He possessed one fatal flaw, though, and that was gambling. Every night he'd go to the curling arena and bet it all on the brooms. One day one man swept the wrong way, though, and all his money was gone. The man coming to repossess his house was endlessly apologetic, but after kicking Jay out and seeing all the memorabilia on the inside, relics of a life once lived, he ran back to his office, and unable to wipe the guilt off his hands with Purell, he hit the concierge bell on his desk over and over again for help, but no one ever came. I was still sitting on the curb, fighting back the sadness in the best way I could, by welcoming it, letting it inhabit me. I sat there in the piercing night for a few minutes longer, seeing a 2006 Chevy Malibu slide by me on the street, going slow enough that I knew it must be watching me in some way. I wondered if he was sad too, driving through the same circles of light that had slowed me to a crawl. For my sake, I hoped to God he wasn't fine. Wendy Lewis was also at Lake Clapton that night. Freshly recruited for the park force, she had been tasked with one goal: to protect the nostalgia and memories surrounding Lake Clapton. You never knew when some sneaky individual, hating love and life and Boy Scouts, would come in and try to steal it, shove it in a duffel bag, and sell it for cheap on Amazon. She had just finished interviewing a little boy about the stolen memory of his first time riding a canoe, and she took a break, walking off into the night. It was on this walk that she came across Jay Brandt, sitting at his solitary table, eating the last fish. I never saw Dill Eastman as the sad type, but one day I walked up to see him sitting on the curb, crying. Worry in my eyes, I approached him and said, "Dill, what's wrong?" He said, "I'm afraid." I asked him why, and he thought for a long time before replying that he didn't know. I sat for a while with him, but then finally we faced each other, looked into each other's eyes, and saw the pain of the truth. After another silence, he looked at me and said, "Half the time I forget to live, and the other half I live to forget." I didn't reply. Wendy sat at the table at the shores of Lake Clapton, sitting with Jay, watching him eat the last fish. After he was finished, they looked into each other's eyes, and just as I had seen with Dill, they saw the pain of the truth. The next moment, Jay looked at her, and without saying a word, he got up, walking into the water of Lake Clapton. He was never seen again. I wish it were contextual. I wish the melancholy of Leland Street was something that transcended me in that moment that night. But in all honesty, sitting on that curb, I was as scared as Dill was. I remember coming home that night from Jay Brandt's funeral. A room filled with people, hundreds of spheres of light. And yet, in that moment, I felt so unbelievably alone. Brushing myself off and picking myself up off the curb, I glance at the streetlights one last time. I turn the corner, get into my car, and drive away into the night. For a brief second, Leland Street sits alone, neither happy nor sad. Fresh dew begins to drip from one of the tall oak trees, each drop a river of its own.